and my wife asked me if I would build her some picture frames. Naturally, I said, no, why would I do that? No, I'm just kidding. I said, absolutely, I'll build you picture frames. In fact, I have scrap wood left over from these big cabinets behind me. Perfect material for it, so let's do it. Let's make this quick, easy, and have some fun along the way. I gotta build 3 picture frames. I'm gonna build them all the same, but each a little bit different. This should be a fast, fun project, so let's get to it. So these are leftover scraps from the face frames I made for these cabinets. They're already milled down, already cut to size. All I gotta do is cut them to length. The only issue is I don't think I'm gonna have enough. So I'm gonna save one of these small pieces aside just in case I need to match them. I'm only making 8 by 10 inch frames, so I don't need a whole lot of material, but again, I'm making 3 of them. So I don't think I'm gonna have enough. So I had to do a bunch of measuring to figure out my sizes here. So these are 8.5 by 11 pictures, like I said. So I want them to inset 1/4 of an inch all the way around. So I had to cut these to 7.5 inches, and then I will rabbet out that 1/4 inch later. But what I'm doing now on the miter saw is trying to set up a stop block so that I can just repetitively cut these top and bottom rails, and then I'll later do the stiles. I totally pulled a rookie YouTuber move. I set the camera to slow-mo so I could get some cool slow-mo mitered shots, and I never set it back. Oh well, here we are with 3 picture frames. They look pretty good, pretty happy with them, but the cool part is what comes next. So my goal is to put splines in each one of these frames. But like I said, all 3 will be different. The plan is to do splines on the corner of one, then to do a whole inlay. So it's really not a spline, it's more of an inlay, but going all the way around one of them. And then a spline that I've never seen, and it's really probably not a spline, again, more of an inlay, and it's really just for looks. I wanna try to do corner inlays. So for that, I came in here the other morning and I whipped up these very fancy, very nice jigs, as you can see. I mean, top of the line jigs here. I'm just kidding. This one is for the corner spline. This one hopefully will work for the top layer inlay spline. And then the third one, I'm just gonna run it over the table saw itself. So I think real quick, I'm gonna make up a push stick. For this little push stick that I'm gonna make, I cut a tiny little piece that I can put onto the end, and that'll be the push part to push the material through. Then on top, I'm gonna take another piece of scrap and I'm gonna cut out a simple little handle. That way I have something to grab onto and we can be very supportive up against the material that we're cutting. This will all make sense as I'm cutting. Before we start cutting our inlay pieces, I need to figure out the kerf width of the blade so I know exactly what thickness to cut that material. So first we're gonna cut a scrap piece of wood and then I'll measure that kerf width. All right, now that I got the kerf width set up, this is where it gets sketchy. I have to get the fence super close to the blade and make those cuts. That's why I made the little push block. Then we're gonna set the fence at what I think is close, and then we're gonna use our test piece here and cut out some test pieces. All right, I think we got it. As you can see, it's not quite going in, but it's so close. So close that I can sand it down just a little bit to get it to that perfect fit. Before we cut this down with the table saw, I'm gonna run it through the joiner, get it nice and flat, and then we can get our inlays. So I don't know if you can see the figure in it, but it's really cool. Beautiful. So I wanna mention, this is really just for me putting in the time, getting back into the shop. It's been a year plus since I've done anything like this. I had all kinds of jigs like this. I had sleds, I had it all, but we lost everything in a fire. So this is really just me rebuilding those things, getting back into the work itself. All right, now that we got our inlay or spline material cut up, we're gonna move on to actually cutting the splines. So I'm gonna start with the side or corner spline. This one's a little bit intimidating just because you got this big old piece and it's got to sit in there and it's got to be straight and just right, but it's easier than you think. It's not bad at all. So the way I'm going to set up the spline on this picture frame is I'm going to try to get it dead center of the picture frame. That way, obviously, it looks the best. I just make sure I use a clamp this into place, and just support it really well. Go nice and slow. It's really easy. Could go a tad deeper. I think I'm gonna raise my blade just a touch. That way we get the biggest, best looking spline we can come up with. That's pretty good. I don't want to get too crazy with it. And just so you know, this is a piece that got cut too thin. All right, that looks good. Pretty well centered. I'm gonna go all the way around the edges. All right, well, those cuts look fantastic. They all turned out really, really good, and they're ready for the spline. But first, I'm gonna get the other two cut up, and then we'll go from there. So the next one is this very funny looking contraption. Like I said, I just whipped this thing up really fast just so that I could get these splines put in. Hopefully it works really well. If it does, I'll keep it around. I'll be honest, I've never done this style before, and I'm kind of curious to see how it turns out. I think it'll be cool. I hope it'll be cool. So let's find out. This one's a little bit sketchy because there's no way to clamp down, but it'll be all right. I'll just hold it real safe, real secure, it'll be good. I'd really like to have one of those clamps that screws onto the top of the sled, but I don't. It's all right. We'll make it work. So again, I need to set the depth of the blade. So I'm gonna raise it up a little bit, use the test piece here, make a couple passes, make sure it's just where I like it, then we'll move on to the frame. All right, I got the depth set to where I want. Now it's time to try this guy out on the actual frame. All right, well that worked exceptionally well. I mean, like really, really well. I'm super thrilled with how that turned out. We'll see how well this one actually turns out. I don't think it's all that great being just the cuts, but I guess it's kind of cool. It's a little different flair to it. All right, enough of this one. Let's move on to the last one. So my plan with this one is to do inlays on the face frame. It'll be the most intricate one and probably the most detailed one. So I'm not really gonna try to explain it. I'm just gonna get to cutting and we'll see it at the end. All right, now that these are finished cut, we can move on to the inlays. This will be the cool part. All right, this next step's gonna be quite tedious. I just have to go through and see what fits, see what doesn't fit, sand it down if it doesn't, put it into place. I like to use a lot of glue in these situations for two reasons. One is that it acts as a lubricant, and two, it fills any of the cracks or voids. And when I sand down, you won't notice any imperfections that might be there. All right, I think that's it. The nice thing about a project like this is you really don't need any clamps. As long as there's a good enough friction fit, it's all good. You can just glue them and leave them sit. So I'm gonna let these sit for a while. I'm gonna go eat some lunch. We'll come back and cut them down and keep on moving. All right, the glue should now be dry enough for me to continue. So I'm going to work on this one first because I need to make another cut and add more splines to this guy, or inlays, I guess they are on this one. All right, so to get this cut down, I'm just gonna use this little handsaw, get it close, and then I'll finish it off with sanding. This one, depending on how close I get, I probably won't sand it yet, just cut it down, add my next inlays, then we'll move on to the next two. Now that the dirty handsaw work is done, I can move on to my hand plane and get this relatively flush. Now that we got that flush, I'm gonna run these two sides over the table saw and get a groove on those sides, and then we can throw our inlay in there. And I will note real quick, I have not made any adjustments or even touched the table saw since the last two cuts. So everything should be exactly the same, should be. All right, now that we got the second inlays in this one, we get to move on to the other two. These two hopefully go quite a bit faster and quite a bit easier. This one especially. All I gotta do is trim up the ends and I can start sanding. Well, that one's pretty smooth. Looks really good too. I love the way this turned out. You can't go wrong with oak and walnut. They just go together beautifully. Well, that obviously needs a little bit of sanding, but first I'm gonna do the second one. The second one, like I said, I don't know, it might not be that easy. You know what? Maybe if I do it upside down. All right, well that went significantly easier than I anticipated. I'm not gonna lie, I'm really liking this one. I really like the simple aspect of it. This one's cool for that same reason too, but you can't really see the splines. These you can see, it's kind of fun. All right, let's move on to every woodworker's favorite part, sanding. Yippee! All right, as far as sanding goes, I just worked through the grits starting at 80, probably ending at 220, and they should look really nice when we're finished. All right, I got these two sanded down to 80 grit, and let me tell you, they are looking good. I got a few tiny little gaps on the miters, but we'll take care of that later. For now, I believe the glue is dried on this, and we can get this all trimmed up and sanded down also. So for this, once again, I will be using my little saw to trim up the ends and then also shaving down the tops. Then we'll move right into sanding. Well, unfortunately in this one, there's quite a few little gaps in the inlay all throughout the front. So I'm gonna do the glue and sawdust trick. If you don't know what I mean by the glue and sawdust trick, I lay out a bunch of glue, lay out some sawdust, mix them together, use a putty knife to smear it all over this board, fill in those gaps, sand it down really good, and it should look really good in the end. You know, sometimes you can still see it and it's not the best solution. For these little gaps, it makes it completely disappear. You don't even know that there was a flaw there. I'll show you at the end though, that this big one over here will probably show up still. All right, well that got a little sloppy, a little messy. It's not really my best work, but it'll do. There is a much easier version to doing that glue and sawdust trick. And that is just smear a little bit of glue on the crack and just instantly start sanding. The sawdust that the sander creates will just fill in that gap and it'll completely disappear. And just like that, these miters look like they never had any gaps in them at all. Granted, this one hardly did. This one turned out really, really well. This big old mess, however, had cracks and lines and stuff all over the place. I didn't do such a good job on this one. But in the end, all that matters is that it'll look good, and it will look good. All right, I hope you can see it, but after doing all that glue trick and sanding, this looks awesome. I really like the way this one's turning out. Can't wait to get some finish on this, see how it looks. But unfortunately, I've only done 80 grit, so I need to go through all the rest of the grits. So, I'll see you on the other side. Well, I stayed out here pretty late last night and got these all finished up. So after I was done sanding the tops of these down to 220, I also hit by hand, I hit the edges here just to knock off the edge and make them feel really smooth. These feel great. So now it's my favorite part of any woodworking project, and that is finishing. For the finishing, I'm gonna be using this teak oil. To be honest, I've never used teak oil. I've probably used every other oil there is on the market, but not teak oil. So the only reason I'm using this is because it came with the shop when we bought the property. So it was free, or it was really expensive. Either way, it's what I'm using. So I'm gonna put some gloves on, start rubbing this wood. There's so much storage in these cabinets, I forgot where I put my gloves. I got a little excessive with the oil on this one, but that's all right. I think what I'll do is get it all over my gloves and I'll just see if these need any more. Well, these really turned out great. I don't know that I'm a huge fan of that teak oil. I think maybe it's just too old, so it was really like tacky. I don't know, like I said, never used teak oil. But I really like the color it gave it. It gave it kind of a bronze color. Made that oak look really good. All right, now that these are dry and looking really good, might I add, I'm going to add these picture frame hangers. I really like using these because they're extremely easy to install and they look good. And just like that, 3 beautiful picture frames. Well, this was a fun project. I can't wait to get them hung up in the house. Which one's your favorite? I think they all look pretty good personally, but I think this one's my favorite. This one's really cool when you look at it from the side or from an angle. Unfortunately, there's just no pizzazz up front. I really like this one too, but yep, this one here, this one takes the cake. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.